Welcome. I'm J. Michael Silver, and this is Foundational Steps, the show. I talk with people about the choices they make and how they get where they are in life now. In this episode, I'm talking with Aura Walker, founder of AWH, Aura Walker Hypnotherapy. We talk about how she was born at an ashram in India, the struggles of growing up in New York City, and how she seemed to be hiding a secret talent from me. Links for Aura and all the timestamps for things that came up while we talked are below. Please support the show by leaving a comment or a review and check out our affiliate links. There might be some cool stuff you're interested in. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell. To go deeper or ask questions, find us on patreon.com/foundational steps and on all social media platforms. Enjoy our conversation. Aura, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me, Michael. I am
Yeah.
really pleased to be here today.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited. So I want to kick things off and just ask you, when did you have your first kind of awareness or consciousness that you were doing this thing called life and that you were actually making choices and had some control in where your life was going to go?
I think it's a progression, right? It's like a learning curve. From the time that I was born, my mother in particular kept giving me this message that I had chosen to be here to kind of help humanity. And I think I sort of, waved it away constantly like a gnat.
How old
Stop
were
bugging
you
me.
when you first had an awareness that she was trying to, give you this message?
I mean, she just always has, but just to give you a little background, I mean, I might jump around a little bit.
Sure.
I'm not Indian, but I was born on an ashram that has gotten some notoriety in India. It's called the Sri Aurobindo Ashram. He actually wrote a book called The Adventure of Consciousness. He was a revolutionary. He was like the Malcolm X of India before Gandhi. And in that book, The Adventure of Consciousness, which is a biography written about him, there's a chapter called The Secret. And the chapter was the title was lifted by Rhonda Burns, who was a marketing genius, a multi-level marketing genius. And she really fabricated this whole allegory about the secret of life. And really what he said was the secret is you got to work really hard at whatever you want. I was given that book at a fairly young age. I didn't really get into it.
What was his name one more time?
Sri Aurobindo.
Sri
A-U-R,
Aurobindo.
Aurobindo. So he was an interesting character. He was educated in England. His father really identified with the British government more than the Indian government. I think it was sort of this, identifying with the oppressor, which can happen, with imperialist occupations. It's this sort of deep-seated cultural shame, and that his father was a doctor who was probably Western educated, but just had this deep shame about being Indian and sent his sons to be educated in England. And his youngest was Aurobindo. And, the father left them enough money and heard a false story that his son had drowned and the father died of grief. But left them enough money. His son finished Oxford, I believe it was, and aced everything. He had a photographic memory. Wow. And had to wear Western clothing. And then basically the government tried to recruit him because he was just so brilliant. And he got on a boat, went back to India and started a revolution. And he doesn't get a lot of credit for starting the revolution, but the British government kept trying to recruit him. And he kind of toyed around with them. And the story is that he did all their tests, and the one test that he refused to do was ride a horse in front of them because, of course they had like cavalry and all that. So it was like giving them the big finger. And then they put him on a, like most in danger, or most dangerous, not endangered, but most dangerous person list, kind of like a CIA list at the time. This was like, I think like the 30s or 40s, probably 30s, maybe early 30s. Anyway, maybe early 40s. And then, because he was really active in doing like what he called supramental meditation to change world events around World War II.
So was
So
that
yeah,
you were born there, and then were you raised
I
there
was
as well?
born there. My father's French and my mother is Heinz 57 Asian, but really half Chinese, half Malay. But the Malays are really diluted because of the Malay Strait. So they had like, the Indonesian, Dutch, everybody went Irish, everybody went through the Malay Strait. So my father went to Malaysia with a friend of his and started the first nightclub. And then there was a civil war that broke out, and he didn't want me to be born in a civil war. So he said, "Oh, I have all these French friends in French India." And he took my mother to French India, built a house on the beach on this beautiful kind of Condé Nast, what would be like a Condé Nast house right
Wow.
now on the beach. And she had gone from having like servants in this big house, and she'd been born into dire poverty. So she was not happy going to India because she thought that there would be a continuum of that kind of lifestyle, and there
Mm.
wasn't. But really, what had happened was Aurobindo, once he started the revolution, the British jailed him a few times, and then they threatened to put him in jail for life. And why they didn't put him in jail for life right away, unless they were still trying to recruit him. I think they saw that he was, really kind of an asset on some level. But he fled to French India, and he had so many followers that it started this community. And there was a French Egyptian woman, meanwhile, in Paris. Now this is pre-World War II. So she said she was having visions about him constantly. It was like driving her mad, to the point that she left her young son and her husband, who was a doctor, took a ship over to India and wrote a grant to UNICEF and bought all this land,
Mm.
which is still there. And you could Google it, Aurobindo Ashram. And there are all these Europeans there. So it's actually French India. It's a little province of India that's French. It's called Pondicherry. It was actually in the life of Pi. And so they were encouraging people to come and develop this community. And so my father's friends had invited him to come. So I was born there. My sister was born there, and a number of kids. And yeah, I was
So how
lucky
many
enough to
how
get
many years
away.
did you spend there, and do you remember your time there?
I was there for 6 years, and it was idyllic. And then it got very chaotic because my parents split up, and then my mom remarried my stepfather, who's American.
Mm.
So it was sort of like went from paradise to like chaos.
So
But
do,
I
as
I
a
don't
go ahead.
I don't think there was like this realization of like I'm here, but they had given me this message, like the woman who moved there, her nickname became the mother. She's known
Mhm.
as the mother. She was the one who bought the land and who built this community with a trust from UNICEF. And she really was, very she orchestrated kind of the building of the community. And he was really kind of who he had already amassed a following around him, so that there were people there already who were really following him and
Mhm.
recognized who he was. I think that's rare, and I think we've kind of lost that today, where people really recognize, people who are very pure in spirit, and really have kind of that genius. I mean, we do recognize it like in the entertainment world to a degree, but I mean, they were recognizing him, I think, because he had really gotten the ball rolling in terms of getting the British out of India. And I think he spoke to the masses, and he was not really into the caste system, so he really started to disrupt these old systems and implement change. And so the mother, who's this French woman, she allegedly communed with every child that came in, and asked them. I think it's a little fishy, because I'm like, oh, everyone was named AUR something because that was his name, right?
Oh,
So
interesting.
I was lucky enough to get away with aura. I was really lucky. There were some kids with some really interesting names. So like there was a kid there, his name was Oro Louis because his parents were Italian.
Or
So
Louis.
I just
Interesting.
I get a kick out of that. But so there was this constant message to the kids, like, you came here to save the
So
planet.
was this is from not your mother, but the mother of the ashram that was, giving you the
Both
message.
of them.
Okay.
My mother totally bought into it completely. So
Okay.
I would say that I really kind of took it with a grain of salt for most of my life. And then I really fell into, I didn't like go into counseling and psychology and art therapy, like with purpose. It was sort of this, meandering path, like literally like walking on a path and going, oh, this is a good place to sit for a while.
Yeah.
I went to, so we traveled a lot. And then my mother was really, she was a clothing designer, and she'd started her foray into designing in India.
Mm.
She started with designing hammocks and crocheted clothing, and had employed what we call now sustainable commerce. She started that in India, 1970. So she wanted to continue that. So we moved to New York City when I was 10 so that she could get a loft, because we found out at that time, it's really interesting because New York had gone bankrupt. And of all people in the world, Donald Trump had, of course, borrowed all this money that he never paid back. But he pumped life back into New York with all this money he borrowed and never paid back. And he brought Fifth Avenue back. So he
So
sort
do
of
you
slowly started.
remember any of this, or is this just your like looking backwards, you've done the research and so you kind of know what was going on? Or do you actually have memory of like, how your mom was operating and, what was happening with Donald Trump and everything else?
Oh, well, the Donald Trump stuff I learned, more recently, but
Mhm.
at that time, New York was really defunct, and you could buy these abandoned buildings, and you could buy, lofts for very cheap. So there was this influx of artists and designers and people who wanted the space. And so my parents got in on that. And so, they moved to New York when I was
Mhm.
10. It was definitely a culture shock for me. And I would say that maybe that was where my first realization of like, okay, I have to really be present if I want to survive living in this atmosphere, because New York was very different from India, living on a Condé
I would
Nast
imagine.
beach, to we lived, then in different beautiful parts of we traveled a lot, and we lived in all over, did a tour of India, then we lived in Nepal, then we lived in the Dominican Republic for a little bit, then we lived in Washington, D.C., where my American grandparents lived. My grandparents worked in the Foreign Service, so they were kind of part of the Tony DC set.
Mhm.
And then we moved to New York City, and it was like complete culture shock, like, late 70s, early 80s, disco, graffiti, street culture,
Mhm.
and it was like sink or swim. And so, particularly around the age of 12, early adolescence, and I started getting a lot of male attention. I really made a conscious decision, like, you have to really be present or you're going to get completely taken advantage of. So that was kind of the
So,
first
and
realization.
is the realization that you're going to be taken advantage of, is that your adult self, trying to make sense of what you were feeling, or did you actually at 12 have a concept of being taken advantage of?
Oh, it became to be such a regular occurrence of, I mean, from a very, even a younger age, I was getting a lot of male attention, but I was getting so much in New York City, and New York is known for sexual harassment. I mean, it's just no, it's just, it's a city where it's very common. And so it became an awareness of, and I had some friends, some young friends in junior high who were female, who were very tough,
Mhm.
and kind of taught me how to be streetwise, and like, don't take any crap, because if you, the minute that you kind of, it's like that
So,
psychology with dogs. Like, if
yeah.
you, the minute you show fear, that's it, it's over.
So
So
your
it was
friends,
really like this presence.
your new friends in New York would actually give you lessons on how to be tough and how to kind of, deal with the new surroundings and the new kind of culture that you were surrounded in.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I would say like between 12 and 14,
Hmm.
there was like a crash course on how to navigate,
Right.
the streets, because we were really an interesting generation of New York City teenagers, where it, was a generation of kids whose parents were in the arts, and we were latchkey kids, almost an entire city
Hmm.
of latchkey kids. And it was really an interesting time because we were able to roam the city and socialize,
Yeah.
and meet up in groups, and you would identify yourself by the high school you went to. And so it was no longer that, those days are gone, but it was this really interesting time in New York. And so yeah, if you're running around New York, you're gonna run into, we were, knock on wood, we're very lucky that nothing really terrible happened to us, but we'd come up on some sketchy situations, like, some gangs of really tough kids, and
Mhm.
how to deal with them when they were trying to jump you or steal stuff from you. And basically it was, just kind of keep walking like as fast as you can, like do not stop, do not engage, which is a good life lesson now too.
Well, I
Like,
mean, it can be. It depends on circumstances for sure. So, it's interesting because you said earlier that you landed in the kind of world of therapy and what you do now. Initially, you didn't come to it with a sense like you were trying to heal the world. Yet you're also, it sounds like you had quite a bit of exposure when you were a teenager to how things could go sideways and how things could be dangerous. And I'm just kind of curious, if you just kind of landed where you landed, was there any conscious choices of like that tied into like what you were seeing in the streets or the danger or any of that, or where people were going wrong, or in your mind?
not so much in New York, believe it or not, but I would think that earlier things I saw, like extreme dire poverty in India, where,
Mhm.
we were not that, I mean, we were not that poor. You saw lepers on the corners, which is interesting. We're sort of seeing that now in LA with all our homeless, in this pandemic, that they've just been ousted. They were like the first round of people to just be ousted onto the streets. That's like a common thing in India, except they don't have tents. They really have nothing. I mean, it's hot there. So,
Mhm.
but they're people who are just literally like born onto the street and like have nothing. And there's just this incredible dire suffering. And I think seeing that as a very young kid, right, from like the first 6 years of my life, being aware of that. And yet there was this symbiosis, like people got along. I mean, I'm sure
Mhm.
there is crime there, but it's not the same. It's like they don't have gun violence. They have their issues, but it was sort of like things were sort of just working and flowing, but yet you're aware that there are these people who are untouchables. And for sure you don't want to touch them. I mean, they're like lepers literally sitting on the street. I think that kind of intense suffering, I was, as a kid, I think children are really in tune with, like, because kids really innately want to be happy. And so I think when kids
I think adults
see
want to innately
somebody,
be happy too.
it depends on the adult. But I think kids, it's more just, it's a natural way of being. And so when you see people who are really, really suffering, it's kind of like, why? What is that? Like it
Mhm.
just becomes really jarring. You don't become as desensitized to it like as an adult. I think for kids, they really do take more notice of it. Like, what is going on there? And I didn't really get the answers, but I think that probably left a deeper impression on me. And still to this day, at some of those images, I can't forget.
So those images for you were seeds that got planted at an early age, and it was years before they actually bore fruit or kind of became part of your thinking and part of like what you want to do with your life. Is that an accurate understanding?
Yeah, I think there was this real understanding of kind of the injustice of it all. Like, why did they have to suffer so much?
Hmm.
And when before we came to the States, we went to Malaysia to visit my mother's family, and her one of her brothers, who's no longer alive, was a transmedium healer, and he was doing healing ceremonies through, you know, for lack of better words, what we call channeling, but it's more than that. I mean, if you've
Hmm.
ever been to Asia and seen that in person, and it's like a deep, deep mystical cultural experience, it left an impression on me, like, what the heck is that? What is
Hmm.
that?
Especially because
Where
it's your
somebody's
family. It's not just some stranger.
Oh, yeah, and then we were there, like, right at the time of all of the ceremonies and, like, seeing them do this intense stuff, like, put their hands in boiling oil just to show, like, mind over matter and, you know, sticking a sword in their tongue and then there's no wound, this kind of
Hmm.
stuff that you see, like, I'm seeing it in person and, I got very, very sick when I was there, and it was, I think, just being sort of dragged around a lot and
Hmm.
traveling a lot. And for me, the object identification was for me was not an object, right? Like a teddy bear or something. It was the place. So I was really missing India, like the first 6 years of my life, having this entire beach to myself as my playground. I
Yep.
was really attached to that. So then traveling all around and then going to these ceremonies, I was really kind of dismissive, like, but it left a very deep impression. And when I was in college, I really started to question, well, how did he do that? And then I saw like the homeless people talking to themselves on the streets of New York, and that probably reminded me of the homeless street people in India who were really bereft. And and then like, they seem to be in some kind of trance state. So I'm kind of going like, what is this kind of alternative um
You saw some
realm that
similarities. Yeah.
well, what is that? And so then I had gone to art school, so I really started exploring outsider art and the art of these, you know, these patients in Lausanne, Switzerland, in this famous institution where they were selling the art, which became art therapy. And then I got out of New York. It was the end of the '80s. The party was over,
So
and I got
you
out
got
of
out
New
of New
York.
York when you went to college, or you went to college in New
After
York?
college, I got out of New York and I went straight to New Mexico. But on the way there, I said to a classmate of mine who happened to be male, um, I said, Jonathan, I really want to drive across country and I really want to meet American Indian people because I had read these accounts of ceremonies that were very similar to the ones in Malaysia.
Hmm.
And so I started to make these connections of maybe these people can explain to me what the heck that was. So we drove across country. My agenda was to actually go and see some of these ceremonies and find out from American Indians like what is this?
And
What is
so,
this? What are you doing?
when you were in college, what did you get your degree in?
My undergrad is in liberal arts and fine arts.
And so you were doing liberal arts and fine arts, and on the side, you were, looking into, some of these things that you had experienced when you were a child, the healing ceremonies and, Native American practices, and that inspired your journey west.
Well, I went to Parsons in the New School, and the New School was started by all of the great minds of Europe who fled after World War II. And so it sort of still holds that genre of modern, um, I would say like eclecticism.
Okay.
So I took whatever classes I could that I was interested in. And one of those was Native American religious rights, freedom rights, because you never saw any American Indians in New York. And I remember learning about American Indians, it's the typical Pocahontas stuff. And I was like, something's not right here. And so they gave us a reading list, and I really started reading books that were blowing my mind, like Black Elk Speaks, and where these, right, at the turn of the century, there were still these wisdom keepers who were giving these, oral histories of their religious practices that mimicked a lot of what I had seen in Asia. And I started to make the connection. At the same time, I became interested in defining what is mental illness, this realm that these people are in their own zone, and then finding out about this institution, this mental institution in Switzerland around around that same time. It was maybe the 20s or 30s, where they really started to work with people and support them through their own art. I thought that was really interesting, and that their art was very raw and very different, and that people like Picasso were trying to mimic that rawness. I started to kind of tie them all together. And I said, let's go on this road trip and find out from people here on this continent who are still practicing this. And it appeared to me that the Lakota were one of those tribes. And so we went. They wanted it. So my friend Jonathan, his roommate, and then his brother's roommate came along. So I think when you're like 20, 21, you can only go on a road trip like that with like a couple of guys who are like bodyguards. I don't think it's safe for women to do on their own, but they just were into it for the pool and the beer, and they were like,
Yeah.
sure, whatever.
I mean,
And so, yeah, we went to reservations and we participated in ceremonies.
I think it's also depends on who you are as a person. My fiance travels by herself all the time and has been, for, the last 15 years or so. And I've have a number of other amazing, female friends that, have no problem traveling abroad. So I think it can still be done and could be done, years back. It just depends on, where you're going, how you're doing it. I mean, look what Jane Goodall did, and that was decades ago, many, many decades ago. But, it's an interesting statement to make because it also kind of tells you, I think, or at least gives me an indication that that's also where your head was at. And so do you think you were at that point in time feeling not safe as a woman in America, or was it?
I don't think, I mean, I think that levels of safety for women are shift all the time, day to day, minute to minute.
Yep.
I don't think that women are safe in general in America, in the world. And yet, I've never been assaulted. I've kept myself safe, but I didn't feel that it was safe to drive across country into these uncharted territories by myself. I really, and I wouldn't want my 19-year-old daughter, who is now back at my college,
Mhm.
to do it on her own. I
Mhm.
just, and then though we didn't have cell phones back then, I don't think it would have been a good idea. So I felt it was better to go with companions. It happened to be three guys, and I think that worked out well that way.
That's great.
And we all went to school together, so we knew each other. They were kind of like brothers. So they burped and farted the whole way, and I was sort of like disgruntled, but it worked out, and they humored me when I said I wanted to go do this stuff. And I think I took them on a magical mystery tour because
Cool.
I really had a vision of what I wanted to do, and they had no idea what I was dragging them into. But once we did it, I mean, we've sort of joked of doing a little documentary about that trip, because we were, just graduated college. My grandparents gave me some money, and we just drove straight to the Badlands. And then I met this ranger, and he thought,
Mhm.
of course, because of the way I look, I passed as American Indian, which got me in much faster. And he said, "What are you doing here?" I told him, and he said, "Well, you got to go talk to this guy. He, is very involved with Sundance and with these ceremonies." And so he gave me his name and told me where he was. And I mean, it was like some movie. I mean, I walked onto the reservation. I used this guy's name. They told me where he was. I went up. I told him who gave me his name, and he had me in a ceremony within days. And then
And your
we
and
were
your three
invited.
friends joined and you were
They came
accepted to.
along. Well, yeah, they were just along for the ride,
Yeah.
and they kind of came along. But once we were in it, it was just it was like, for them, it was like,
Yeah.
just mind blowing. And yeah, and then I started to really see that, yeah, some of those connections I had made from reading the accounts in the books by Richard Erdos, who documented, he was an author who documented a lot of that stuff
Mhm.
at the turn of the century, that, here I was seeing it in real time. And that I was able to get some answers, but there's always this mystery. There's always this mystery of, the different realms. And here we are in this human realm, and then there's this other realm, and some people are able to tap into it and like harness incredible power. Like, how do you heal someone of cancer in minutes?
So the ceremony, was it a healing someone of cancer ceremony? Was it just a spiritual ceremony of communing with God? What was the ceremony that you did that blew your friends' minds and, kind of, got you some of
There
your
were all
answers?
different. There were different ones. Some were healing ceremonies where people were healed. Some were penance ceremonies, like the sun dance is really penance, but to
Mm-hmm.
see people putting themselves through these intense 4 days of dancing, sweating, piercing, suffering in order to balance the suffering in the world was like, wow, like that
And
concept's really interesting.
you're there strictly as an observer, or do you participate? Like, how does that work?
I participated in some of the ceremonies, like the sweat lodges, but like the Sundance, I was just an observer and a supporter. Like
Mm-hmm.
the people around the periphery are supporting with their energy, and so like there was this crash course on energetics and like, how to support people energetically who are going through suffering. So I would say that trip was really the beginning of my education in um, I would say the healing arts. I don't like the word healer because it puts the responsibility on the individual, who would be what I really call or prefer to call the facilitator.
Mm-hmm.
I think that if anybody, the number one rule of healing is the person who wants to be healed has to, number one, want it. Number two, they have to do the work. And so only the person who can facilitate that can facilitate the process. But the individual who needs the healing has to do it. They have to really do it. And if they don't want to do it, then it's all a waste of time.
Now, when you were doing the ceremonies, and how long were you there for?
I don't know, like maybe in South Dakota, maybe a couple of weeks, but
So,
all
I
in
mean,
all,
after a couple of weeks, that was like, kind of the big transformation of saying, or maybe there wasn't a big transformation, but that was, part of the transformation for you to kind of, move towards wanting to be, um, a facilitator and, hypnotherapist and get into that world.
no. So then I moved to Santa Fe, and which is, the crystal hugging Mecca of
It's a beautiful,
America.
yeah, it's a beautiful city. It's
It is, but
such
there's
amazing
just
art,
like,
and
yeah. But I mean, there's every woo-woo thing you can think of, and
for
some of it
sure.
can be dangerous. I got targeted by one of the, medicine men the along the journey.
Mhm.
And so I got whacked in the process. I learned,
What does that
about
mean? You got
people.
whacked?
Well, this guy, he was doing one of the ceremonies, and he kind of zoomed in on me and like laid a heavy trip on me. And the flip side of positive work is negative work. And so he was really into like the dark arts and negative dark energy, and he really tried to manipulate me with that. And luckily I had found some good support systems that helped me to kind of get out of it. But that was really kind of sobering, that in this whole genre of healing. And I really, and I was just listening to, I think it was KPFK this morning, I think it was. Anyway, I don't know who it was, I caught a snippet of it, but it was really an interesting conversation. And the guest was saying that, we tend to in America uphold this ideal of gurus and healers that, it's like all positivity and like wonderfulness. And there's really not a voice of like the reality check, right? The reality check that like working with people who are extremely disturbed, or working within like what Carl Jung called the shadow.
Hmm.
It's not sexy, it's tough, and it can be dangerous, on an emotional level, on a psychological level, on an energetic level, and then on a physical level. So, when people like what I call like the person who was like the yoga chick yesterday is now the life coach today, that I kind of laugh at it, because I'm like, you can't you can maybe get away on paper or on the internet with, sort of this facade, but like when it comes down to it, you can't get away with like not really doing the work yourself and not really
Yeah, but
putting the time.
there's nothing to say that that yoga girl yesterday wasn't doing the work to be the life coach of today. I mean, just because.
If they were going through the training, but if they weren't going through the training and they just decided to all of a sudden just change put up a title. And I see that a lot. And I think it's important to do the work. It's really important to do the work
So
and
do
to
you?
really get the training.
That's interesting. It's interesting because I think doing the work can look like a lot of different things and can be a lot of different things. I mean, just, you know, dealing with your own shadow can be a lot of work. And, you know, depending on who you are, you can come out the other side of that and understand how to help other people with their shadow. I mean, that happens. That's part of the reason why psychologists, you know, they have to do therapy. You know, they can't just go and be a therapist. They actually have to do therapy themselves. You know, it's part of that process. So do you have an idea of what the work looks like, you know, based on what you did? Or like, is there an idea of work in some other paradigm that you picked up along the way that, you know, this is the work, this is not the work?
I mean, I think that the work means not only doing your personal work, but getting training, real training and supervision. I mean, real, actual hands-on training and supervision, and being part of a community ongoing that has that, you know, and that is the checks and balances. Because depending on why people are in it, again, it's not something that I think anybody would just get into. So to answer kind of a question you asked before, how did I get into it? I ended up in Santa Fe after that.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized really quickly I had an opportunity to become a famous painter in New York. And I kind of said, yeah, no, that's not enough for me. And so I
How do you have an opportunity to become a famous painter? I mean, that's such an arbitrary like statement in my mind because uh, to me, someone who's going to be a famous painter has to, as you said, put in the work. And you know, I haven't
because
you haven't mentioned that before.
there's this
So where
yeah,
did the
there's
painting
this
come from?
because my undergrad was in painting, and there's a program that's sort of like a coming out party to the art world in New York called the Whitney Program. And I was
Okay.
invited to be part of the Whitney Program right after graduation, which had I gone into the Whitney Program, which would have been sort of like a graduate level program, but it really is like an on, you know, entering the echelons of the New York City art world. And I turned it down. And it's hard to it's rare that you don't really get invited to be
So,
part of that.
so the Whitney program, I don't know anything about it. I've never heard about it before. So this is really kind of interesting. So the Whitney program is literally a program designed by the art world elites to
Kind
basically
of, yeah.
take people from obscurity and introduce them to the world.
Well, straight out of art school, yeah. And you know, you're in this program and you hone your skills, and then you're really given the introductions into the art world. And it was a very unique opportunity. And I basically just said, I got to get out of New York, and I got to go see more of the country, and I got to develop myself
I mean,
more, that I can't be in New York.
that's such a profound, I mean, decision. I mean, and you knew, I mean, you're saying that you could have been a famous painter, so you knew that the prestige from, you know, going through that program and being introduced to the world that way uh had a lot of gravitas, you know, a lot of power, and you didn't even think twice about going through with it.
No. But I grew up in the middle of the New York City art world, and I was really, you know, after the 80s, a lot of the art world was really driven by money, and it was
Mm-hmm.
less about making art. It was more about making a product. And I had also had a mentor through my last 2 years of college who was a photographer. He recently died actually last year, and he was an uncle through marriage. And I'd also studied photography since I was about 10. And he'd really, I'd worked very closely with him. I was curating his prints and mounting and matting his work. And he did primarily black and whites that were tinted by chemicals, by heavy metals. So they give them this kind of different hue of color.
Mm-hmm.
He was just an amazing artist, and he his story is pretty amazing. But he really instilled in me that, you know, don't make art for anyone but yourself, which I think is you know, that's a luxury to just make art for yourself and not for anyone else
I
if
think
you're
it could be
trying to
controversial
survive.
too, depending on who you're talking to. I mean, there's plenty of people that, depending on the art form, would say that the only, value in doing the art is for your audience, whether that's, singing or, performing in some extent. Photography, can be done. But anyways, I'm just curious, like, you had a mentor, you were in this program, and you could have gone this way. I mean, looking back, do you think you were jaded? I mean, did you have a sense like, I'm just over this at the time? Like, how do you how do you like at the time,
Yeah,
it
I
seems
think,
like you just you said you wanted out, but I don't know what that
yeah,
means.
I
So,
wanted to get out of New York. It was, I had, seen sort of the heyday of New York in the best way possible. The 80s New York were a lot of fun in terms of art and culture, intersecting, but it was also, the height of the stock market and this
mhm.
excess, and it all just kind of, there was just a hangover at the early 90s that just wasn't fun. I had a friend that OD'd and died, and it was just like, okay, it's time to see something else and do something else. And really, I was really yearning. I had spent, like I said, weekends and summers in these incredibly beautiful natural
Yeah.
environments like Martha's Vineyard in Connecticut, but I really wanted to commune more with the natural environment and live somewhere where there were no skyscrapers and there were no tall buildings. And that was Santa Fe. And so I lived there for 2 years. And it was there that I started to think about, okay, now what am I going to do? And then the whole topic of grad school came up, and I started in Santa
And
Fe.
during that time in Santa Fe, I mean, you're surrounded by artists and all kinds of spirituality. Did painting not come back up for you? Did you not feel like you were?
I continued to paint actually in Santa Fe, and I found out about art therapy through my aunt's friend who was channeling a group of Buddhist monks. And my,
Mhm.
my mom's family is really Buddhist and Taoist. And so there was sort of like a familiarity there. Of course, the European side of the family is all Christian and Catholic. So
Mhm.
there's a real cultural divide within
Yeah.
myself, but I seem to balance it pretty well. But I really found out about the field of art therapy for the first time. I had never even, and then that's where Lausanne and that you know mental institution in Switzerland kind of came back to me, and I thought, now this is interesting to me. Working with art and helping people to channel their emotions into expressive arts and revealing the inner world on a medium, whether it's paper or clay or whatever it is, that you can't hide what's going on. It's like a complete pure reflection of emotion is through artistic expression. And I recognize
Mm.
that in my own work, but then the whole idea of art therapy as a field really, that interested me. And then so that's
And,
how I got
and
into art therapy.
so was that was a field or a burgeoning field or existing field that you were aware of there? And
It
how
was actually very new.
very
Art
new?
therapy is only maybe, 50 something years old. Yeah.
Mm.
It's still a very young field, professionally.
Right.
So, it's yeah, it's a pretty young field. So I was going into it knowing that, but again, I never made any choices based on like, following the money.
Right.
Um,
But you were, but
I,
it sounds like that's the most kind of animated you've been over, expressing, kind of your journey. And so it sounds like that was a pretty impactful moment when you kind of cued into the art therapy as something that was interesting to you. Like, do you
yeah,
remember being like a moment that stands out beyond anything else, or?
I would say that, you know, the the kind of coming together of all those interests of spirituality, artistic expression, and then healing. Because I wasn't really interested in becoming a trance healer at all. I
Mhm.
wasn't interested in, lending my body to any kind of external force. And from what I'd seen, it takes a huge toll on your body too. And so it became kind of the perfect solution for all my interests. And then I transferred to this bigger school called Naropa, which has gotten a lot of notoriety over the number of years.
Mhm.
But it was at that time, it was still not quite well known. And I called it the Jedi school. It really was like a Jedi school. And it just became really kind of the perfect environment for me in particular, because of my interests. So, learning about the psychology of color,
Mhm.
learning about meditation on the mind, learning about mindfulness practice, like all of these things that became actual training courses for me, where I could take all my experiences and my interests and channel them, not, energetically, but
Right.
like forcefully into something, and really kind of hone my craft in terms of the groundwork of the work even that I do today. And now today I'm working for LA County in Child Protective Services, and all of that training, now it's like 25 years, all of that training um, definitely helps me so much in what is one of the
I would
toughest jobs
imagine.
on the planet.
Now, do
Yeah,
you
it's one of the
do,
hardest
you're a
jobs.
hypnotherapist. Is that part of your work with children?
No, in fact, I don't usually do hypnosis with children, although I have
Mhm.
in private practice. So the hypnosis came in when I first moved to LA. I was here about 5 years, and I realized I was competing for the same jobs that I was interested in
Mm.
with PhDs, and I
Mm.
have a master's. And so that was really sobering. And I had split up with my daughter's father, and sort of this whole like white picket fence BS story of like what you're supposed to do in your
Mhm.
30s, like get married and have the white picket fence. Like that didn't work out the way that like I was told it would, right? You don't think, oh, like that's not going to work out.
Yeah.
You
I
don't go
don't
into
know.
anything thinking that's not going to work out,
Yeah. I don't know anyone that actually worked out for. I'm sure it's worked out for some people, but I mean, I didn't meet my partner until I was 44. Well, no, I guess 43, I think. I don't know. Yeah, we've been together for like 2.5 years now. So, and prior to meeting her, I was kind of like, well, maybe I'll just be single, for the rest of my life. And this just isn't going to happen. I have amazing friends and wonderful people in my life. And I was just kind of like, eh, by that point in time.
I mean,
So
43 is still pretty young.
Oh,
But
absolutely. My
yeah.
grandfather, I could argue that my grandfather didn't meet the love of his life until he was 68, I think. And then he spent the last nearly 20 years together before he passed away. So I don't, I'm sure the white picket fence, ideal life, whatever works for someone. I just don't know anyone that it's worked for.
I don't know, but it didn't pan out that way. And so here I was in LA with this little kid,
Mhm.
and, you know, trying to figure out what I was going to do. And I stumbled on an ad for Hypnosis Motivation Institute.
Mm.
And again, I was really intrigued, like, what is that? When it comes to anything sort of outer bounds about the mind, and spirituality and intersectionality, when you say the word hypnosis, right? I mean, again, that's like got this big mysterious kind of, I don't know, like feel about it. So I took a course, an intro course, and I realized very quickly if I can master this, I can really help a lot of people, because the connection between the body and mind, I'd taken the meditation classes, but really understanding the mechanism of how the mind works in terms of being a mechanism,
Mhm.
right? If you really, really understand that, and you really understand what hypnosis is, and you really understand how it works, um, and you do it with positive, because it can be used in a very manipulative, negative
Just
way,
like
of
anything
course,
else. Yeah.
like anything, right? So, but if you really do it with pure intent and you really understand it, I became really fascinated with the idea of developing protocols that could really work with the body mind mechanism
Hmm.
in terms of kind of a more hands-on quantum healing, not this transmedium quantum healing, but like this hands-on practice where it became tangible in person. And so that became my goal. I went to night classes, and I really sort of mastered that skill and got certified in clinical hypnosis,
And
and
just
really
to,
developed.
so I'm just to make sure I'm understanding correctly. So when you split up with your daughter's father, and you were out here looking for work, you realized that there was a disconnect because a lot of the other therapists and people that were working in your field had doctorates and you only had your master's. So like
Well, they
hypnosis,
were going for master level jobs. I was like, this is ridiculous. Like
yeah,
PhDs are going for these, you know, like program manager jobs. It's like, what the heck?
yep. Uh,
So,
a- and then
yeah,
the hypnosis was, you hadn't thought about it before. It was just like you saw the thing and you're like, well, hey, why not?
I
And
had
maybe this would give you
never
an edge.
even, I'd never really even, no, I'd never thought about it. Never came into, I never even knew about it. I was like, what, again, what is this? What is this?
Yeah.
How does this work? And then once I really learned about how it works, and again, it does transcend into this other area, this gray area
Yep.
of another realm. It's another realm, going deep into the mind, into the recesses of the mind. Just in terms of layman's terms, I can explain it like the hard drive. You're accessing the hard drive of the mind. And if you know how to do that, you can kind of delete a lot of spam very quickly. And that makes room for new information. It makes room for new messaging. The antidote to trauma is new memories. And that's really kind of fascinating when you think about the body brain mechanism. And if you can make room for new memories where there's a lot of this spam taking up room, then that's where the quantum healing
I think
happens.
that's a really interesting statement. The antidote to trauma is new memories.
Yeah,
I
I
think
mean,
that,
that's sort of known actually.
I just think I've never heard it put that way before. Um, I mean, part of the work that MAPS is doing with MDMA therapy has to do with basically recontextualizing the memories and reprocessing them, and creating new memories around that memory. And that's a lot of what the protocols for the MDMA MAPS therapy is, for PTSD, soldiers and so forth. So I mean, it falls right in line with what you're saying. I've just never heard it but that way. I think that's a great simple, the anecdote to trauma is new memories. I just really like the simplicity of that.
Yeah, I again, like I equate it to a hard drive where you can, or a desktop where you can move
Hmm.
things off the desktop and clear the trash bin and really clear the slate to start over. I think, I've worked with some veterans and they're tortured by their past experiences,
Right.
and what really, and I just had an uncle by marriage pass away who was tortured his whole life from Vietnam, his experience in Vietnam. These were kids that were forced to go over there and kill
Yeah.
people, and they were told that this was their job. And it conflicts with everything that they're raised with, of being a good Christian, a law-abiding citizen, that you don't do this, and if you do this, you're a bad person. So there's this real conflict of the conscious and subconscious mind of what has occurred. And so, working with one of the older veterans that I worked with, we really went into this state where he addressed everybody he'd killed. And
Mm.
in addressing everyone he'd killed and facing them directly, and saying, listen, I was told to do this. I didn't do this. I would never do this, and getting that spiritual closure. When he opened his eyes, it was like 10,000 pounds had lifted off of
I
his
bet
shoulders.
it sounds really powerful.
So yeah, I mean, and that was, in what, 2 hours of his life, and
Hmm.
and that he was able to walk forward having that closure. So in order, that's where the quantum work happens, right? And I think, people are their own worst critics, and people torture themselves. They torture
For sure.
themselves over all kinds of experiences, over childhood experiences where children are very vulnerable. And, I think that my passion in working with children now at this juncture of my life is not just job security, which LA County provides that, but
Which is nice.
children, yeah, it is on a practical level,
Yeah.
but children are the future stewards of this planet, and
Mhm.
that's sort of my agenda is, before I leave this planet, I would like to help as many kids as possible to have the tools that they can to be able to navigate the future, and not just be bedraggled by it, and I think that it's getting harder and harder on this planet to survive on so many different levels.
Mm.
So I think it's really important that we provide children with basic tools to navigate the future. It's going to be
So
very challenging.
when you're working with children now, you said hypnotherapy is typically not part of that. Is it mostly talk therapy, or is it art therapy, or have you combined some of the other things that you?
Well, for LA County, it really is, it really is a nuts and bolts job. It's really about the law and protecting children from
Mm,
damage. So you're really just, it's the parameters of protecting young brains from trauma and from, it's like interrupting cycles of trauma and intergenerational trauma. It's kind of like the buck stops here. Like, your parents and their parents and their parents have been traumatized, and we're going to make sure that these kids are not more traumatized. Like, they are already traumatized from the fact that they've been removed, they've been drug exposed, all these things, or they've witnessed domestic violence. Those two are the biggest reasons that kids are removed from families is domestic violence and drug exposure.
mm,
But the resilience of children is really phenomenal, and that growing brain is really resilient. And if they can get that proper nutrition and stability, it's very, very healing, that in
yeah,
itself. And so I reserve, all of my other training. So it's really skills training that I use for the county, but like in my
that's
private
cool.
practice, which the county allows you to keep a private practice on the side as long as it's not during county time. So it's usually a weekend practice, and it's, I don't, at this point in my life, I don't pursue clients. Like, they find me, they ask me, they want to work with me because of what I do, and it's word of mouth or
Yeah,
whatever. So
that sounds
yeah,
like a
so it's
really great
private
way
clients.
of kind of working your private your private clients, because over the years, as I've worked with people, the thing that I probably disliked more than anything else was the kind of the advertising, or the um you know trying to get clients. you know it never appealed to me. It's, I feel like, to some extent, the people that want to work with you or need to work with you for whatever expertise you have to offer them, it's oftentimes best when they choose you, because they're much more likely to do the work, and um, they're going to get out of it what they need more often, is what I've seen.
Yeah, I mean, I started pretty early building my online presence like 2006. When
Hmm.
I graduated Hypnosis Motivation Institute, they really encouraged us. And that was really kind of the beginning of the takeoff of the internet.
Yeah.
I was lucky to have some connections and learn a little bit at that time. And it's changed so much, but
Mm.
key search words were a big thing back then. They still are, but Google's really changed a lot, and it's a big game
Yeah.
now. And so I did the whole game for a little bit, and I was like, yeah, no, I'm not playing this game anymore. So, I really developed a fairly strong website, and I've left it there. And yeah, it's something that will always be there. But when you were saying, how do I work with kids? I give them the tools, and then if the parents want me to do art therapy, I will do art therapy,
Hmm.
primarily under the age of 10, because 10 is when the brain kind of kicks in and has some cognitive reasoning. That's the age of reasoning. Under 10, you're really working with conditioning and giving kids tools. like primarily a voice of expression and learning how to talk about certain things, how to express certain things, what is permissible, what's good to talk about, with traumatized kids. Let's talk about this, and let's normalize the ability to talk about this. Giving a child a voice, and the permission to be able to talk. So, these are just some examples, but and kids respond so fluidly and immediately to art materials.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually was part of developing a arts program, bringing arts to centers for kids that have been indefinitely suspended from school and to the juvenile detention center in North Carolina before I moved out here. And it was a fascinating experience watching how the arts and different modalities of art could really engage, with the children, and how the children engaged with the facilitator so well. I mean, it was really amazing to see, and very powerful in many cases. But it was yeah, it was it was a great experience.
Yeah, I think that the art materials become that bridge from the subconscious and unconscious into the material world, and the tangible world, and then it also gives a voice to the unspeakable, right? And to
Hmm.
things that where maybe you can't even put a word to it. It's just a feeling, or it's
Hmm.
it's an experience, and you don't know how to even
Yeah.
begin to touch on it because it's so difficult and complex. So yeah, there's something magical that happens in that art
Yeah,
making process, and I think that
absolutely.
through our conversation you can kind of see where my interest of all those different
Hmm.
meetings coming together really formed through art therapy.
Was the, maintaining your private practice and then working with LA County, was that a pretty easy decision? Or when you went with, when you found LA County, was it like a big relief in terms of like where you were at in life, and, having a daughter and living in LA and everything else?
I mean, it was a complete new adventure.
Hmm.
Um, it's not quite corporate, but it's government, and
Yeah.
it's local government. I'm a big Bernie Sanders fan. And of course I wanted him, but America's not
Hmm.
progressive enough. And, you know, working with local government, there is something really important about that, about
Yeah,
let's work
absolutely.
in changing what's in our backyard. And so when my daughter was 15, she was able to walk to school on her own. I really started to get antsy, like, I can't just do laundry when I don't have clients. Like, I need to be more hands-on. And
Hmm.
so I started looking at some of the highest paid jobs for my degree. And one of those was with Child Protective Services. And it appealed to me working with children rather. I had already worked with many different adult populations. And the
Hmm.
thing about, really damaged adult populations is it's almost impossible, unless, and if in terms of the public sector, you can't do the transpersonal type of work that I do in private practice. You can't do that. You can't do the hypnosis. You can't do the quantum work because of all the legalities and all the minutia and the red tape, right? So I wouldn't be able to do that type of quantum trauma work with, like, say, people on Skid Row who really need it.
Hmm.
Um,
Just
you know,
just in
I
case
can.
just in case anyone listening doesn't want to look up transpersonal or doesn't know what it means, would you describe it or define it, just so that I don't know who's listening that may or may not have any experience, with that word, because it's I don't think it's immediately obvious, if you were a wordsmith, to pick it apart and what it means.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to give you the textbook definition, but transpersonal really means looking at the whole individual,
Hmm.
working with the whole individual, and helping that person to transcend wherever. they're stuck at into their highest potential, right?
Mm-hmm.
Their most um, positive potential, that like their whole potential. So it's like taking that person, you have to meet them where they're at.
Mm-hmm.
You can't like, you can't put on them what your expectations are, and then working with that person to literally transcend. And that's where that transpersonal part comes in, to transcend the state of being of where they're at into um, their highest potential.
I
And
like the
that
definition.
varies person to person. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really it.
And so, doing that work, you found this whole new journey, because to some degree you didn't feel like you were capable of doing that work with adults, and having an opportunity to work with kids, where they don't have as much baggage, was more exciting then. Would that be?
I mean, some people say, "Oh God, how can you do that work? It's so heartbreaking, like working with children." And they, it's a skill level. It's a skill
Mm-hmm.
level. I mean, I remember my first paid internship at Naropa was with Denver Mental Health, rehabbing dual diagnosis, which is homeless street people who are drug addicts who are basically
Mm-hmm.
self-medicating. That is the hardest population on the planet. I would not venture into doing that again. Although it was, I cut my teeth on it. So I went for the toughest,
Right.
sort of work my way down. Been there, done that. One of my colleagues worked on Skid Row for 6 years. You do what you can, but at that point, you're working with the human mechanism so damaged beyond recognition, just a walking zombie, literally. There's brain damage, there's organ damage, there's body damage, there's emotional damage, spiritual damage, you name it. There's damage on every level.
Mm-hmm.
And again, the healing process is mutual. You cannot lift someone out of the gutter unless they give you their hand. And when someone is to that point of damage, the best thing that you can give to them are parameters of safety, like housing,
Mm-hmm.
and there's just been this big push to get the homeless off the streets of LA, and housing, food, the very basics, nutrition, that becomes the fundamental best approach of healing for people that damaged, is give them food and shelter. And
Yeah.
from there, maybe they can decide, maybe, but oftentimes they don't. So, I decided that children were a lot more helpful. And again, with children, it's providing the safety and the structure. So, I had to go through a year of testing. They do not take it lightly. It was
That's good to
intensive.
hear. That's good to hear that the city is, putting you
They
through
vet
the
you pretty
yeah.
heavily. And I went in there and I sort of said to one of the older women, I said, because I was like the last one who left. There's a test, the first test, it's like a 4-hour test, and it's a lot of practical questions, a lot of ninth grade math that I was like, what the heck? Like, I don't remember any of this. But I was one of the last people to leave, and I kind of said to one of the older women when I was placed at my location, I said, you know, I felt really humbled to be one of the older people there. There are all these young college students, and I call them young brains. Like, they just whip through it and we're out.
Yeah.
And I really lingered like an additional 30 minutes. And she said, we want more seasoned people because there's more longevity. Like, the
Yeah.
attrition rate is less, because the younger people come in and, maybe they're still living with mom and dad, or maybe they want to, move out of state or whatever. They're more flighty. And so I think people with a little bit more experience under their belt, they tend to stay for more personal reasons, and the job security, the stability. And there's nothing like county benefits. There's nothing like government
Yeah.
benefits. I'll tell you
Well, I
that.
imagine that having a daughter also is a massive difference, because probably most of those, kids um, didn't have children and may not even know where they want to end up, or, and they're just applying for a job, because they need a job.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the majority of my coworkers are, older,
Mm-hmm.
um, and mostly women of color, mostly
Mm-hmm.
mostly Black women who I think definitely want to see change and social change, and still one of the highest populations that are in child protective services is Black children. So I think that they've seen what's happened in this country, and it's still happening, and they want to see that change happen from the ground up. So it's very meaningful work for sure. It's very exhausting work on a lot of different levels, and very challenging. Yeah. But I would say that all that Jedi training definitely prepared me, and each person who comes to the job has their own, what they say, their own reason why, the why are you here? Right. So each person has their why. And for me, it just became really practical at that point. It was right pre-pandemic that I got accepted and placed. So I've been working through the whole pandemic.
Oh, wow.
Which has really kind of normalized my life, right? It's like not much changed except that I had to wear a mask. But and then we were under quarantine. The county was shut down for 5 months. But other than that, it was like business as usual for the most part.
Do you have ties to Naropa still? Do you have any take part in any of the alumni activities?
I mean, I'm tied to them online. Like I'm part of a lot of social media groups. I've sort of, wanted to go back and teach at some point, particularly
specifically
like
to go teach there though.
Yeah, I mean, I've thought about teaching on and off over the years, like doing seminars, and I've done a couple of like very minimal speaker series here and there, but I particularly want to pass on this technique that I've developed, this quantum healing technique. And I think that it is teachable. It's a technique. So,
I mean, if it's a technique, I would think it has to be teachable.
Yeah, it's teachable. And so I've thought of, at some point maybe doing a seminar there, like a summer seminar or something like that.
Oh, that's cool. I mean, are you tied to LA mostly because of your daughter, or do you have other ties to LA as far as, why you're staying here?
I mean, they say that LA is now more expensive than New York. It's funny because I've always felt that I've been a visitor here. One of my aunts gave me a book called Third Culture Kids, which is kids, and the high school that I went to in New York was the UN school, the United Nations High School.
Oh, cool.
And that was really, I felt that that's where I belonged, because it was all third culture kids. It's kids who don't belong to one culture and don't belong to one country, and have lived in multiple cultures and multiple countries. So I kind of, like Thich Nhat Hanh just passed, and he, of course, is Buddhist. And one of his teaching seminars, he talked about home being within, like home is yourself. So I think I've really struggled with like, where is home? But I realized I had this epiphany during the pandemic that probably what has cemented me here and drawn me here is the ocean, because I grew up on, first 6 years of my life was a beach. And so just the familiarity of the ocean, I think it's like those little baby turtles, like they go back to that same beach, so even though I can't go back to that same beach, or, it'd be a big trip. It's not feasible for me to live there, but it's something familiar about that. Like my basic working out sport is paddleboarding. Like that's what cool. I do. I did that all through the pandemic. That's what I can kind of, and swimming.
Yeah. I love paddleboarding. It's so much fun.
Yeah. So there's something about the beach, I think, that's holding me here. I have been kind of feeling like a drawback to the East Coast, but it really depends on how many cyclone bomb storms they have the next couple of years. Cause I don't know if I can deal with that again, but yeah. So, and there's something about the accessibility to nature that, ties into just where I'm at. Like I said, like when I left New York, that was really what I was seeking, is just, I feel like that's so important.
I think it's one of the greatest things for me about LA is because you can be in the mountains, you can be on the ocean, you can be in the desert, you can be in a forest, all within a few hours. Yeah. Like it's very, very accessible to anything and everything you could want. And then you've got all the benefits of being in a city as well. Do you, other than stand-up paddleboarding and swimming, do you have any other practices, for kind of mental and physical health and just your general well-being? Are there any other practices that you're really big on or keen on?
When I was in college, I really started to become interested in herbal medicine and particularly like herbal birth control,
Mm.
as I became a young adult because hormonal birth control, it's important, but I felt like, God, we have such few options, and so I really started researching natural birth control and herbal medicine for birth control. And you have to be so on top of it. I mean, you really, really have to know your body. You have to really be in touch and in tune. And,
Are
with
you
this whole
using like
pandemic,
pennyroyal or what?
yeah, pennyroyal is one of them, black cohosh,
Mm.
and then there's some other herbs, and even just like a type of rutin is a high doses of rutin, which is a derivative of vitamin C,
Hmm.
just makes implantation pretty impossible. So these are like important pieces of knowledge that are not accessible to the general public or to women in general, but I think some women educate themselves. That really kickstarted my interest in holistic health and natural medicine for myself. So, and my parents were, I mean, everyone can make a joke. My name's Aura. Your parents must have been hippies, but the real hippies were like into like farming blue-green algae. In fact, Oroville was arid land and they turned it into orchards and
Oh,
they farmed it and they cultivated the land and they farmed blue-green algae for export there. So in large amounts. I mean, this is, again, early, like late 60s, early 70s or 60s
hmm,
and 70s.
hmm.
So it's like way, way, way ahead of like what we're seeing now is kind of becoming the norm, right? For these alternative kind of small farms and alternative health. Like blue-green algae is like a big thing now. Well, it wasn't such a big thing, in the 70s and 80s, although you could find it, in
Yeah.
little health food stores. So I really, really eat pretty healthily.
Hmm.
And I attribute that, I blog about that a lot. I think that nutrition and mental health go hand in hand,
Yeah.
tremendously so.
I mean, it's
Um,
interesting. I have a friend who's a Ayurvedic practitioner, and she does a lot with diet and the different dojas. And it was interesting because she's working with some scientists because there's so much correlation now that they're understanding in the Western world between gut health and mood and everything else. And,
yeah,
her work with the, thousands of years old dietary practices is now being completely validated by Western science because they're understanding, gut health and bacteria so it's really fascinating, so it's makes perfect sense that that's a large part of your health regime. Do you
yeah.
have?
And I actually, I was vaccine damaged about 13 years ago. So I opted out of this vaccine
Mhm.
because I didn't feel that there was enough about the technology that I felt comfortable with.
Yeah.
And so based on my age and my health, I thought, you know what, I have a good chance of surviving this. And I did. I don't know which variant I got, but I got it ironically from my vaccinated daughter because she's 19. She got to decide for herself. And they actually requested students to have the vaccine to attend classes in person. So she felt
Yeah.
railroaded into it. But she's also 19 and like her body's like, Teflon, like she can anything, like she can do anything.
Yeah.
I didn't feel as confident, but I mean, it's a nasty, nasty virus. I don't want to get too controversial. I personally believe it was completely GMO'd. It feels like a designer virus to me, but I attribute like my daily protocols of herbs and vitamins and natural nutrition to why I got over it pretty quickly
Yeah.
and that I survived it. Again, I could have been Omicron, it could have been Delta. I have to find out from my doctor.
Yeah.
Um, but it was, I felt the heaviness of it, and how intense it was, and I felt like how intense my immune system was fighting. But I had to like tell myself, you're a lot sicker than you feel, if that makes sense. Like I didn't really feel that sick, but I knew that I was really pretty sick.
Hmm.
That like, my body was in a lot of pain. And even though I didn't feel that tired, when your body's that in that much pain, it's fighting so hard. And so, that was a couple of weeks ago. It was in January. So I've made like a deep stock last night, and I do a lot of stocks because they're so, in terms of Chinese medicine,
Mm-hmm.
soup stock, particularly bone broth now, is like incorporated in oncology medicine.
Oh yeah.
It's really healing. And so I've just been really like respecting my body in terms of like recuperating
That's
from
amazing.
what it
Yeah.
went through.
Yeah, I that's one of the things that I feel like not enough people, really respect their bodies and give their bodies the space to um, you know, achieve what they need to achieve, whether that's mental, physical, or even a spiritual health. A lot of times, we're living in this body and people are not respecting it at the level that it needs to, and they're getting worn down, which then makes them more susceptible to everything else.
Yeah, I read recently that some statistic came out that 88% of Americans are in poor health, and that doesn't surprise me. It doesn't surprise me with the
Yeah.
pandemic and with the very, very hard hit rates of people who succumb to this virus. I just feel that had they rolled out some protocols, just some very basic protocols about self-care early on, that a lot of people could have survived.
Yeah, I just think self-care is something that, regardless of what's going on in the world, I think it just needs to be part of our culture moving forward. Just take care of yourself. And yeah, I mean, that's my wishes for the world to want to take better care of themselves, and for us to take better care of each other. But that's probably idealistic and not going to just happen overnight. But it's it would be nice for it to for us to get there, and to go there.
Well, like you said, in terms of trauma, and being impressed with the antidote to trauma being new memories, something struck me in a video I watched on, it was the whole concept of, can you be psychically attacked? Can somebody send you negative energy? And how do you transcend that? Right? That's sort of an interesting question. I don't waste too much time on it, but it is an interesting question. Like,
Hmm.
can we affect each other from a distance? Right? And that's a big question. I've had some interesting experiences with that, with, people who pass, and I have some premonitions about them before they pass, things like that. But the person who did the video was, very much into like a holistic lifestyle, and she had narrowed it down to, if somebody's really coming after you and attacking you, love yourself more. Love yourself more than what that energy is. But I think that has become a soundbite, right? It's become a soundbite in our society, like, love yourself. But what does that mean on a practical level? Like, it could mean getting a lot of extra sleep. It could mean like taking a hot shower. It could mean like making a very special soup for yourself. Like, what does love yourself mean? Especially like Valentine's Day is coming up, right? And I mean, it's a cute holiday, or not even a holiday, whatever we want to call it, like celebration. It's cute generally. And people, either love it or hate it or suffer through it, whatever. But it's sort of commercialized the whole concept of love. And I think when it comes to self-care and self-love, right, it's not about this sort of like narcissistic, um self-centered focus. It's really becomes practical about like a lot of what I've been talking about taking care of this vehicle of our body,
Hmm.
and how do you take care of that vehicle? And why aren't we? I mean, they are starting to teach more about that, like nutrition in school, which is very basic, and in public school, God bless them, they have such limited resources, right? Because a lot of that food is GMO'd. But like even my daughter, I feel like a lot of it is rubbed off on her because she said, Mom, I traded a 6-hour drawing class for a goal setting class. And I had to kind of laugh because, I think my generation would have taken that 6-hour drawing class and suffered through it. Because we would have felt like that was what we had to do to like, pay our dues as artists and suffer through the 6 hours. And she's just like, nah, I want to learn more about goal setting and like,
It's pretty great.
mastering myself. Yeah. So I think, that's where the next generation, if they can take everything that's gifted to them now with the internet and everything that's swipe easy and accessible and like really use it for a better purpose.
Well, I think that's a great place to end up where, what does love yourself mean and how to move forward with a greater purpose in doing the work. So I thank you so much for taking the time. Don't forget to leave a comment or write a review. I would love to hear your thoughts. And new episodes are every Tuesday. And for shorter clips, check us out on YouTube at Foundational Steps. Thank you. Until next time, remember, your story is yours to write and rewrite as many times as you want.